everybody. Welcome to the next episode of Pencil It In Sports. I'm here with Marc Silverman, co-host of ESPN, the 1000's Waddle and Silvy show. A phenomenal listen if you guys haven't. Marc, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, really appreciate it. I mean, such a busy time in the Chicago sports calendar, some highs and some lows, but thank you so much.
Of course, yeah. And another North suburban guy who, is working and grinding. I grew up in Skokie, so I was in your shoes not too long ago. Maybe it was longer ago with my gray hair, but.
I love it. I mean, I would love to take the Skokie Swift to another Cubs game. It's been a while.
Yeah, that's how I grew up.
Man, it will miss it definitely. But yeah, so I'm just gonna hop right in here. I know you started off your radio on-air career like back in the early '90s, doing some high school sports in Iowa, and then you transitioned to WGN and have been in Chicago really ever since. Can you talk a little bit about just your career path and how that's progressed over time?
Yeah. So, out of college. And I was lucky when I went to SIU, Southern Illinois University. I had a lot of really, really good hands-on experience, but it was really ingrained in me that I had to get a job immediately right out of college. So my first, and my parents had paid most of my tuition. So they're like, you're not moving back into our basement. You're going to get a job. So I took really a job that I didn't love right away, and that was as a news director of a radio station in Colorado. And it was a bad fit. I knew I wanted to be sports, but it was always told to me by my professors, hey, take a news job that will lead to sports because you got to know how to write for news, how to talk about news. So I took this job, and I'm in the middle of nowhere. There's no apartments for rent. I'm living out of a hotel. And like after I was there for about a week or 10 days, I got a call from my advisor at Southern saying, hey, this radio station in Iowa is looking for a sports director, Northwest Iowa. Would you be interested? Are you happy? And I'm like, hell yeah, I'd be interested. So I did an interview with him on the phone, and he hired me sight unseen. And so I left Colorado with the owner of the radio station in Colorado cursing me out, telling me that I would never have success. And I felt bad. I mean, I was only there for 2 weeks, but it was miserable, just absolutely miserable. It wasn't my job. It was so far away. So I got to Iowa, and this was the perfect first job. And I was there for 18 months, and I was doing everything. I was DJing, I was selling, I was doing the news, I was doing obituaries on the air, I was doing the sports, I was doing play-by-play and everything like that. And I knew that after I was there for a certain amount of time that, look, I could go small market, medium market, large market, big city, or I could try and get in, through the side door in Chicago in a certain way. And so I started applying for different part-time jobs, and including this one internship at WGN Radio. So even though I was already getting paid and living on my own, the best path for me was to take this internship. It was a guarantee of 3 months, and they would give me a stipend of $900 for the total 3 months. And then after that, it was good luck. Well, I got there. It's like sort of that, when luck hits the opportunity and you make the most of it. I got to a staff that they didn't have really anyone covering Bulls or Hawks games. And this was in '95. So first of all, hockey talk on the radio and on WGN was non-existent. And Michael had already been retired from the Bulls for over a year. So they had played the previous year. They got eliminated by the Knicks. And there was sort of this 500 team still with Scotty leading them. And they didn't have a staff that went out and covered games. So here's WGN, this big radio station that I always pictured, and Tom Brenneman was working there, and Wayne Larrivee was working there, Randy Minkoff, Cap eventually came over, and eventually Dave Enick came there, but they weren't there when I was an intern. So I said to Dan Filato, who was the production head, I said, Dan, I know how to use all this equipment. I've had a full-time job. I'll do it for free. Can I go cover these Hawks and Bulls games? We have no one at these games. I'll cut up the sound. I said, sure. So I started taking the microphone and I started doing stuff from Hawks and Bulls games. And then, you know, slowly the soundbite turned into, hey, do a 30-second voicer, to, oh my gosh, Michael Jordan could be coming back to basketball. Go out and cover the Berto Center now. Now that I had their trust of covering the Hawks and the Bulls on a limited basis for a month, 6 weeks, and I was going every night, okay, take the recorder, go out. And the day that I went out, Michael did not come back, but I still put together this spoof piece of a Mission Impossible themed thing. And I had the producer of our afternoon show listen to it on WGN radio just to critique me. And he loved it, and he played it for the afternoon host, and they played it twice on the air that day. So that was how I got in. And the next day, when there were still rumors that Michael was coming back, they sent me again to go cover the Bulls practice. Michael came back that day. I did the reports live that day. And then 2 or 3 days later, whatever it was, in March of 1995, they sent me on my first road trip to go to Indianapolis to cover Bulls and Pacers. And I was still technically an intern, but I had gotten their trust of work, taking that opportunity, doing it for free. And slowly I went from intern to getting a job for 5 hours a week to 35 hours a week, to about a year later, they hired me full-time as the sports reporter at WGN. So that's a long-winded answer, but that's how I worked my way up.
I mean, that's an incredible story. I think, like, in terms of, there's some luck involved in everything with, like, Michael coming back there. But one thing that I think personally is, like, a lot of times you have to, like, create your own luck. And it seems like you really did that by, like, taking a risk and kind of leaving a job early in Colorado, which I know a lot of people in the sports industry say it's pretty tight, so you don't want to burn any bridges. But if you're really going to follow something and have confidence in yourself, it seems like a great move there. But I do want to touch on one thing, because I know as somebody in the industry and a lot of people watching this may have some thoughts about going from, like, a full-time role to, like, an internship at a little bit of a bigger company, but one that's really going to give you, or somewhere in kind of rural America that may give you just more responsibilities overall. Can you speak a little bit about, like, in the sports industry, how important, like, experience is compared to, like, the location of where you are to start?
Yeah, well, I think it's everything. I mean, no one has ever asked me to see my, you know, the grades or report cards or transcripts is the word I guess I was looking for. You know, like, you hear about this in no one cares if I can't go on the radio what my transcript says. You know, if I have a good transcript, but I don't understand the business. So I was just a believer in that it's an investment, that you're looking at the totality of your career, and it was a risk. And I sent my parents a card because I knew it was one of those cheesy successory cards, because I knew because I did have to move back eventually, and I did have to live in my parents' basement for this internship for the year, and it sucked. But I was investing in my future, and I had to, like, still convince my parents that this would be the right move. So I sent my mom a card that it was the old picture of the basketball hoop with the basketball on the ground. And it was something to the effect of, you know, you miss every shot that you don't take. You know, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So I knew that I was taking a shot. And if nobody at that time in 95 was going to call a kid from small town Iowa to fill their role in Chicago. That's just not going to happen. Like, my philosophy in the sports metaphor and analogy is you've got to be in the ballpark to be called to the play. Opening happens, you know, you're probably going to get the call eventually.
Yeah, no, it's a phenomenal point. Kind of putting yourself in the arena is extremely important in showing all the great work you can do. So one thing I love about kind of radio, and I know a lot of like, for example, Waddle and Silvy will also live in podcast form, and I'm sure that's been a transition recently, but you have, like, kind of the dependency on the host. Like, you develop that type of relationship with them as a listener, and you come to know their style and kind of agree or disagree with their takes on sports. But that's part of what you love about it, is you know what you're going to get. How have you, throughout your career, like, created a following and just, like, being able to kind of generate a relationship with your audience, which has probably been extremely important in
Yeah.
these times during the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's huge. And I think like when you would meet people in person, they could like your show, but if they have that bad experience for a minute meeting you, it could all go away. You know, when you meet your favorite player, we both grew up being sports fans, you in Highland Park, me in Skokie. And if I met a player for the first time and I loved him for 20 years, but then he was a jerk to me, you would feel differently. So I think there's a lot with a face-to-face and appearances and running into fans at games. I'm a big believer, even though I'm 49 years old, in evolving. And I believe in any business, you evolve or die. So if you don't get on board with the latest technology, and we're doing like a lot of our shows now on Twitch. So that started out as like a gamer way, I guess, is how people would watch people play video games. And now our show, you can not only listen on the ESPN Chicago app, and you can listen on your at-home speakers and your car radio. Now you can watch it on your computer. You can watch it. You can react with us. So I think adopting, when Facebook first came, I was really big on being on Facebook and being active and selling the show. And if I could turn on one new listener, or on Twitter when, you know, I first got on Twitter a decade ago, I think it's all huge. And I think that my belief was the show was 4 hours, but the show really doesn't end because I'm tweeting at night during the game, or I'm doing something funny with my son about sports. So I try to stay on top of mind. And yeah, I think the more avenues we can reach our fans, the better. And I think we've never had better ways to get in contact with people who listen these days.
Yeah. And watching your show, like I've checked out the Twitch right before this and listening, and it's really exciting to see the interaction between the fans kind of in the chat rooms. And is that something you ever use to not really inform your takes, but kind of see what's happening simultaneously while you're talking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's important. I think when you get, you know, when someone gets a reaction, whether it's a phone caller who just calls in and wants to have his voice heard, or someone in the Twitch chat, and we read their comment, you know, it sort of validates why they're there and why they're participating. So I think that's important. You know, I think there's a fine line too, and it's something that I think we all learn with social media, that not everyone's going to love you,
Yep.
and that there are always going to be some critics, some
Definitely.
people who totally disagree with you. But I think if you make light of it, I'm very self-deprecating, and I understand I don't have all the answers, and I'm going to be wrong a lot of the time. So I'm cool with making fun of myself or having a bad take one day, or something like that. So I think it's good to hear from a lot of people, whether it's the Twitch app or reading your mentions. Like, again, it's one thing to not take everything into account, but sometimes there'll be a Twitter mention and someone will give you a tip on a story, you know, and someone will give you a tip on a story that you may not have seen, or maybe they had an interaction with somebody. So it's ways that we broke stories before. So it's pretty incredible on how you can be reached these days, and you could find things out through that.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, one thing I've noticed personally is like, I definitely miss kind of sitting around a table, like having a beer, talking Chicago sports with my friends. So to be able to supplement that through calling into a radio show or speaking virtually with people on a Twitch stream, it really does add another element to it. And it's kind of the excitement for the day.
It's like a club, you know, we all want to be a part of a group, a club. And I think a lot of the people in the Twitch channel have gotten to know each other through the Twitch. So some of our listeners now are friends online because of just the random nature of them liking our show. So congregating all there in the same place. And that's how you meet friends to begin with, is a lot of people have the same interests. So I think it's really, really cool.
Definitely. So I just want to shift a little bit to talking about kind of how the pandemic impacted your role. I mean, I'm sure you were in a studio before at some point, and now you're home, and you and Tom have been together for a while. So I would assume there's some built up kind of collaboration and cohesion between you guys. But how did it change, and what type of adjustments did you have to make when going from in person and kind of having that inherent energy to having to bring it in different ways?
Like, to me, it doesn't matter where I'm at. If I'm passionate about what I'm talking about that day, and yeah, there's going to be times where we may step on each other because we're not together, but we can do the show together. I think we know each other's rhythm and when to speak and when not to, and when to pull back and when to sort of jump in. For me, the toughest thing of the pandemic was from a sports, and I went through obviously something personally with, not only at the beginning of the pandemic, but then I was diagnosed with cancer, and that's why I'm still away. And that's why I'm still not in the studio, because even though I'm in remission, my immune system is still compromised. So I'm not quite back yet in studio, and I can't wait for that day. But the toughest part for me for the pandemic, doing a radio show, was the lack of sports, and not so much not being together. It was, okay, in this world where there's no games talking about the day before, are people still going to come to us? Are people still going to want to hear from us in the political situation with what's going on, with all the updates that they want on COVID? I believe that what we provide now is an even greater escape with everything going on. So I believe there's a huge part and a role that we play. But for 3 months, and I have a lot of faith in us coming up with topics, but when it's 2-3 months of no sports, or will football return, will baseball come back, when's the NBA going into the bubble and hockey? I think there were a lot of questions, and sort of not knowing when or how it's going to look was a huge challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's been great to kind of see how different media personalities were able to stay relevant and to stay just like active and engaging during that time. And I'm sure some insights were taken from that, if God forbid anything ever happens like that again. I mean, the Chicago Bulls definitely aren't in the middle, but you have to think by now, after a couple kind of low draft picks, they'd be building up to something. Do you trust this new kind of front office in just like organizational scheme? Like they're trying to make a culture shift, it seems like, but we see them giving up 125 a game to start the season.
Are you talking about the Bears? Was this
the Bulls? The Bulls.
Oh, the Bulls. Because you broke up there for a second. I still believe, and I don't know if Arturas Karnisovas is going to be great at his job, but I believe in a lot of the things, and it's things that I've been preaching that the Bulls should be doing for years. Why is the Bulls scouting staff such a mom-pop operation? Why do they have one of the smallest front offices in basketball? Why did they only have one player development coach last year in Sean Respert, who sat behind the bench, and now they've got a whole player development staff that's not even a part of the coaching staff? You've got Billy Donovan and his coaching staff. Then you've got a separate player development staff. And under Karnisovas, you have Eversley. And then you've got all these other guys too. And I believe in the modern front office. And I believe the Bulls have made a huge jump there. And I believe they have a competent coach right now. I think they're trying to find themselves out of a lot of bad habits. I think they've been coached by a guy who I wouldn't let coach my high school team. I wouldn't let him coach Highland Park High School. I wouldn't let him coach Niles North. I think he's one of the worst coaches ever. And I believe that this is going to take more than just 3 games. And maybe they're going to get beat worse in some of these games than we would have thought or they would have last year. But hopefully we're going to get answers. Is marketing going to be a true guy that you can build around, or is he a guy that you can trade? Is Zach LaVine a premier player, or is Zach LaVine a guy that you're going to trade? Can Kobe White be a point guard? Is he a sixth man who just scores a lot? And how do you make the perception that this is a great place to be and not a bad place to be? You already have a lot of things working against you. I know you're sitting, I think, in Florida. It's easy to recruit when you go to Miami. Who the hell wants to be where I'm sitting right now at the end of December in Chicago? And that's when basketball takes place. We want to be in Florida. We want to have an ocean view instead of a view of the power lines, out in Highland Park off 41. So, where Michael's house is. So, I think they took a step, and I think it's going to take a little bit, but I'm hoping that going forward, and I like the Patrick Williams draft pick. I think it was it wasn't popular, but I think there are a lot of good things that I see from Patrick Williams, And I'm hoping, because I love the Bulls. I love the Bulls. And I'm hoping that they start winning here in the next year or two.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I mean, they took that step kind of building the new practice facility downtown, which should help get some players improve their recruiting. And I know you have some great memories of the Berto Center, but it seemed like it was time. But yeah, it might be a situation where they have to take a few steps back now to move forward. I was just thinking that was going to be 3 years ago, but we are here now.
We all did. Look, I think if they would
That
have
was the
gone,
rebuild.
right, if they would have gone, and I always preach this, Jimmy and the kids. Like I thought, like I liked Jimmy more than everybody else. I used to fight with Friedel and Waddle about Jimmy. Well, and I was told every year, Jimmy reached his ceiling. Well, how do you know that? If he keeps improving every year, how could you possibly put a ceiling on his progress? And he's not going to be Kawhi, single-handedly leading you to a championship. But I think last year he showed you that he can be a 1, and he may need a 1A, but I think if you would have gone with, we're going to keep Jimmy, and we're going to try and develop a bunch of young guys around him, and then try and make it an area where someone would eventually want to play with Jimmy, not an over-the-hill Dwayne Wade, but someone who's really good, then maybe you could group it like that. And I thought it was, you're playing from behind when you need now 3 stars instead of 2 or 1 star. And I think when you had Jimmy, at least you had something going for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, we all saw what he was able to do in the bubble, and I know the Bulls certainly and Chicago fans miss kind of the toughness he embodied, which I've come to associate with the Chicago Bulls, given that Thibodeau was kind of the coach throughout my childhood, and they played some great defenses. And back in the MJ days, they were a tough go, of course. So Mark, I just want to end off here with a couple quick hitting questions.
Sure.
So, what's the best interview you've conducted in your time doing Chicago sports?
Well, I don't know if there's one specific one, but there's probably 3 people that I think about that I get the most excited for, and you could probably name them. I think whenever, and you worked at Turner, and the relationship that we've built with Charles Barkley is incredible. I don't know if you've ever had any experience with him, with dealing with him. He's one of the kindest human beings there is, and he's just such a friendly dude and a giver. And the relationship that we've built with him is incredible. So I love talking to Chuck. He's come and done shows with us in person many times. Whenever you would get Theo Epstein on, he would come with us in spring training, show up in person. He would show up at a bar in person. Even if it was on the phone, there was one interview, as you rack my brain, from Cubs convention when the Addison Russell controversy was going on.
Oh, wow.
He joined us for 27 minutes, and we blew away our spot load, our commercial break, because he was just so passionate and on such a, roll that he was going for 5 or 6 minutes for every question. And then we did the Jay Cutler show. And I don't know how much you remember of that. Say what you want about Jay. There's usually 50% of the people who love him and 50% who hated him. But we gave Jay a voice when people thought that all Jay was a dick. And what you found out was he did have a personality. It just needed to be brought out. And doing these shows with Cutler in front of a bar full of anywhere from 300 to 1,000 people was pretty incredible. And some of the fun conversations we had, some of the awkward conversations we had too, it had it all. It was full of all of it. So those are probably the 3 things, and 3 things that we had in a bunches. It wasn't just one in particular, but it was pretty cool.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to circle back and check those out. I mean, I didn't love Jay Cutler on the field, but I always respected his toughness. And, that guy was willing to take a hit to get the ball into the end zone. So I was a big fan of that. And then my last question would be just what advice do you have for those looking to get into kind of the radio, sports radio space or broadcasting business? It's extremely competitive, of course,
right,
but how do you kind of elevate, and what are just some characteristics you look for in somebody that could do some damage there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm never one of these guys. I always used to hear people in my profession say when I was a kid, hey, don't do what I'm doing. You know, it's tough out there. And there's a lot of things about the business that may not be great, but I've loved every second of it. And what I say, there are two things that I say. It's what we talked about in the beginning. Do as much as you can. Get as much experience in everything. Because the radio business now is not just the radio business. You have got to write as well. And I was always a huge writer. And the writing for radio is different today because a lot of times you have to double as a reporter online as well. So you have to write stories, you have to report on the air, and you have to just do. And when given an opportunity, there are two schools of thought. There's the school of thought saying some people believe that if you do something for free, you minimize what you bring to the table and hurt your bargaining power. I'm the exact opposite believer. I believe in you're investing in your future. Everything you can prove eventually will come around and pay off. So do as much as you can. And it's sort of connected to that where, you know, work your ass off. That is hard and as competitive as it may be. And as you may get bad news along the way, that if you work your ass off, there's always going to be a position for you in this business. I've seen too many interns, too many part-time and full-time workers who just don't give a crap. And they just aren't willing to work the extra hours or invest in the future. And if you do, there will always be a position for you in this business.
Yeah, Mark, I really do appreciate that. It's phenomenal advice. Just keep creating content, keep putting all your heart and effort into it because there's never enough out there. Really do appreciate you taking the time to come on. Everybody check out Waddle and Silvy 1000 on ESPN 1000 radio. Hope Chicago sports really get on the up here. Thank you so much.